Thanks everyone for joining us today on the Cloud Native Islamabad webinar. And today we are talking about the Hashicorp Waypoint. And if you see the recent blog post, Hashicorp Waypoint 0.6 is recently announced during the HashiConf. And it's been a 1 year of anniversary, I think, from the Waypoint. And they are wonderful too if you want to dig into it. So today I had finally the opportunity to learn about what Waypoint is, what it has to offer for the developer and operators along the road. And I'm joined by Taylor, wonderful friend of mine from Hashicorp, and he will talk us through about what's new feature for Kubernetes folks. So over to you, Taylor. Tell us, my audience, what you're working at right now and what you're most excited about these days.
Absolutely. So howdy, everybody. For those of you that haven't met me, my name is Taylor Dolezal, and I work at Hashicorp on all things infrastructure, application development, developer experience. It's a really, really fun place to be and really great conversations to have with y'all and kind of figure out where you're finding trouble or some things that would be nice to have as you're going about deploying your applications and working with your stacks. So today, I do have quite a bit to talk on. Waypoint is going to be the star of the show, but I also have some things around Terraform and Kubernetes, and I'm going to be deploying to Amazon today. So really excited to get started on that front.
Yes, absolutely. That's a wonderful news. So thank you very much for joining the session today at Taylor webinar with I am hosting. Every time I joined the Taylor, I learned something new, something really cool. And today is I hope we enjoy the time together. You will also enjoy the time with us. So Taylor, present your screen and start sharing what the Waypoint is. And we are really looking forward for the news and for the Kubernetes.
Absolutely. No, thank you. All right, let's get things kicked off. So as a general disclaimer, if there is anything that you want to see, or if you want me to make the text bigger, whatever it might be, please feel free to let me know. Any questions, more than welcome. Please feel free to throw those in the chat, and I'll get to those as I see them. Awesome. So today I'm going to be telling a story, and that story is going to be how do we get our applications to production? I'm going to show you some Terraform code and some Waypoint code. We're going to go from absolutely zero, nothing instantiated, nothing ready, and we're going to deploy an application onto Kubernetes using Waypoint. We're going to set the stage with Terraform on that front. So really quick, I'll actually go ahead and show you the application that I have here. I've pulled this from the Waypoint examples repository, and it's a pretty simple application. It's just going to be an application that shows a web page, serves it on port 5000 on my machine, and well, might as well just show you, right? Let's go ahead and flip over to my terminal. All right. So as any good project, at the beginning of any good project, let's go ahead and make sure that we have our dependencies installed. Okay, whew, that was really quick. All right. So now let's go and start up this application and see what we're working with today. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my browser, and let's go here, and let's go to port 5000. Funny enough, I've heard some issues with those of you that have upgraded to Monterey. It sounds like the AirPlay printer, or there's a service that Mac OS uses that is actually clashing with port 5000. So if that happens to you, definitely take a look at your sharing settings on that front. It was a fun tip I learned over the weekend. Okay, so we can see this is the application that we want to get started with and work with. We're serving that at port 5000. And again, you know, this is pretty simple. We can go about changing this and working with this here in just a little bit as we get our system set up and we can get a feedback loop together. So, okay, so that's the application that we're working with. Again, quite straightforward. So let's get started on crafting how we're going to actually get this up and running. Okay, so I'll go ahead and bring this over here. Apologies on the window management. There's a lot to get through today, so lots of windows, even though I'm on a Mac machine. All right. First off, I don't have anything up or running right now, so I'm going to play both parts, both dev and ops parts in this presentation today. And let's go ahead and get things kicked off when it comes to Terraform. So I'm going to go ahead and I've gotten everything all set up here on the back end. This takes about 7 to 10 minutes to get running, so I'll go ahead and kick that off. And as we can see, I need to go through the Terraform workflow. Got this set up on a different machine. Now I'm on my iMac. So let's go ahead and run a Terraform init. That'll get everything kicked off for us and download all of Terraform's dependencies. And as this gets set up, I'm going to walk through the Terraform code so that you know what I'm actually standing up and what I'm actually working with. All right. We can run some other things. I've already run these on while setting up this demo, but you can run things like Terraform format to make sure that all of your code is formatted correctly. You can also run something called Terraform validate, which helps out with making sure that all of your syntax is correct and just making sure that you have referenced everything correctly, variables and such in your code. So as we can see, everything is good to go, which is great. I like code when it works and we get all those green success messages. Okay, so I'm not going to run a Terraform plan just because I've run that in the past. And I know that that looks good and works. I'm going to go ahead and do a very, very dangerous thing, which is Terraform apply. And this is what we call a Terraform YOLO. You only live once. And with that auto approve, I do not recommend doing this in production. Always makes sense to kind of gate your infrastructure changes and make sure that they go through the proper checks before going through this. But alas, this is a demo, so not too concerned on that front. So as this kicks off, I'll scroll my code over just a bit, grab the right window, and we'll kind of talk through what's going on here in getting set up in the background. So first off, we've gotten everything kicked off with Terraform. We're going to be standing up a Kubernetes cluster to deploy everything onto. When it comes to installing Kubernetes into AWS, which is the cloud that we'll be using for this, I've used some modules from the Terraform registry. So these are my required providers. I'll step back into this in a second, and I'll kind of walk through what our infrastructure stack looks like. So first off, as any good Terraform practitioner does, we want to make sure that we set our providers. And again, we're going to be using AWS, Amazon Web Services, as the cloud of our choice here. So, and I've set the region here in my variables file, which I'll step through here in just a second. First off, with every stack that you set up, you have to have a network, right? You have to be able to interact with it, talk with it, load it up in your browser, etc. That's what we're doing here. I've used the Terraform modules, the VPC module. I'm using version 3.11.0. Don't say that 5 times fast. And I'm getting this set up with some information that is going to be useful to my Kubernetes cluster. Inside of the cluster, I need to make sure that the public and private subnets are labeled correctly so that Terraform knows and Kubernetes knows where to stand up those load balancers and other associated infrastructure. So I will share out this link here in the chat. Just give me 2 seconds, and I'll share out this repo if you want to follow along. All right. So this repo is one that I've set up that really helps me out with Kubernetes demos. And I have one for Azure, I have one for Amazon, and I'm currently working on one for Google to be able to stand things up. I'm trying to make this as production friendly as possible, so it's something you could actually use within production and have it be secure by default and kind of a lot for all of those concerns as well. So we'll be very happy to hear what you think. If you have PRs or issues that you want to open up, if you have questions, happy to answer those as well. All right. So as we can see, we have our network component defined here. And it does look like a lot in here, but it's pretty straightforward as you start to walk through it and have an understanding of the components within Amazon Web Services. All right. Next up, we want to stand up our Kubernetes cluster. In here, it's a little bit more of the same. We're using another Terraform registry module. This one is the EKS one. In here, we're defining a cluster name and a cluster version and kind of getting all of those prerequisites set up for Kubernetes. I also have logging turned on, and I've also encrypted the secrets because for those of you, I don't want you to be surprised if this is one of the first times that you're interacting with Kubernetes, or if you don't know, Kubernetes secrets are base 64 encoded, which means they're secure in that you can't see them right away in plain text. If you're setting a password or something sensitive there, you might not be able to read it, but it's very easy to base 64 de-encode that and then ascertain what that value is. We're actually going to, or we won't walk through this today, but that's something that Waypoint's going to use in a little bit to actually log in our secrets within Kubernetes and config maps within Kubernetes. So always be mindful of what you're putting into these values, because it is by default very easy to ascertain or obtain what that information is inside of those secrets. So just as a heads up there. All right. Now, let's step through some of these variables and see some of the things that I've set today. So in here, I've set my project name, which is EKS in action. I've also set up some validation in here within Terraform. It's a nice feature that you have. You can actually set custom validation on your Terraform variables. So if you can look something up with a data object, you can get really complex if you want to make sure that what people are passing into Terraform is what you expect, or just to check something and make sure it's something that you expect as a module or provider creator, or as you're working with Terraform, make sure that this is as you expect it to be, which is important, right? Unknowns can be a little scary when it comes to infrastructure. We don't like surprises. Surprises are great for birthdays, not so much for infrastructure. I've defined my region, which you saw in the AWS TF file here. I'm using US West 2. That's in Oregon. So it's a little north of where I'm located geographically, but that's one of the faster data centers and one that I like to use because it's nearby. I'm using Kubernetes 121. I've defined my cluster instance size and how many worker machines that I want to have in here. That's 3. Only want to burst up to 5. I've also defined the different types of logs that I want Kubernetes to take care of as well. So just so that I can make sure everything looks good and gets audited appropriately. I don't want to write out my Kubernetes cluster config because I'm going to go about doing authenticating to that a different way, which I'll show you here in a second. And then lastly, defining my CIDR, which is this value here, to set up the VPC that I showed you. So that's pretty much everything. One of the other components of my cluster is this KMS key within Amazon, and that will actually encrypt my secrets so that when they're stored, this key is signing and decoding them rather than just base 64 encoding them, which gives me a little bit more security. But I'd be remiss working at Hashicorp and not bringing up Vault is something that you should check out if you're interested in different ways to keep your secrets more secret, as well as make sure that they're really secret across all of the clouds that you use too, or on-prem. I've got a couple good contacts there if you're more interested in checking out Vault, or if you have some questions there too. So please feel free to @me on that front and I can connect you. Excellent. So, all right. So that's pretty much all of the infrastructure that we're setting up. There are a few more things that I'm going to walk through. We'll just take a look on it, check in with our cluster here, and it's about 7 minutes in, so it should be ready for us here shortly, and then we can walk through the rest of our application, and I can answer some of your questions today. All right. So the last mile with this Kubernetes setup is going to be the Helm charts that we install. So there are some things that are nice to have when you start working with your Kubernetes cluster. Again, Kubernetes is great, but when you look at its defaults and look at everything it offers, as soon as you have that installed, you'll notice that there's some things missing. The batteries aren't really included in some contexts, and that's on you to set up as an operator. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've defined this Helm provider here. I've given it all of the authentication details it needs, and that's going to allow me to install these charts over here. So let's get started with the Nginx ingress. This is not one that I'm going to be using in these demos today, but is a nice to have. The way that Kubernetes works is that you have deployments, services. There are other objects to config map secrets, but really the important ones are that deployment where you're actually instantiating your application, the service, which is the way to connect with it. And services allow you to stand up a load balancer, which we'll do with one of our Waypoint examples here shortly. But the recommended way to work with that is our ingresses. Ingresses stand up one load balancer or specific load balancers tag them within your specific cloud offering, and then route traffic in. It's a lot more secure way than standing up one by one load balancers for each of your applications, and really makes it easy if you want to integrate with something like OpenID Connect, or if you have different types of settings or requirements or restrictions from your organization, and just kind of onboarding that becomes a lot easier. The ingress component actually connects the outside world or the internal network with your application, rather than connecting it to that service, rather than just kind of opening up the service collectively on that front. It's a little bit more difficult to manage, I would say, on that front. If you use services directly with load balancers rather than using ingress, I absolutely recommend using an ingress in that case. Okay, next up. This is going to be for one of our demos and is something I'm starting to see a lot more projects ask for to be installed by default on your Kubernetes cluster, and that's the metric server. The metric server is going to let us know what our CPU and memory and some other systems level items look like. It gives us more observability into our cluster. I'm curious to see what happens to this project, honestly, because it's already been taken in by the Kubernetes special interest groups. And really, I could see this becoming a default thing that gets added to your clusters based on the version here in the future. That's my hope. Right now, it's something that you still have to install. So I'm going ahead and doing that within the Helm chart here. And then lastly, I'm actually standing up the Waypoint server inside of our cluster. So Waypoint does give you this ability to install the server, and it is something that you need. You can install Waypoint server locally as a Docker container and run it that way, or you can install it to your Kubernetes cluster, your Nomad cluster, whatever platform works best for you. There are several different options. ECS is another option as well. Today, we're going to be installing onto Kubernetes using the brand new Helm chart that came out in Waypoint 0.6. So that's going to be nice. And this follows more of an infrastructure as code approach. You know, if you don't really feel comfortable, or if you're not at a point to open up access to your cluster, definitely something I would not recommend to run that CLI to install the Waypoint server. Definitely recommend this. This is a very good way. So again, we should see our cluster up here and running shortly. Looks like it's taking a little bit longer today. Maybe the instantiators just need a little bit more coffee on the AWS side, but that's okay. It should be up shortly. All right, cool. So as soon as this is done, I'll step back into that. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and start running through our Waypoint code. If you have any questions in the chat, please feel free to bring those up, and I'll be more than happy to answer those. All right, let me go ahead and get some things prepped here. All right, and then we can have fun here in the command line. Okay, let me do this, and you know what? Syntax highlighting is pretty nice, right? So we're going to go ahead and change this here. Let's do. There isn't currently, so I'm not sure how many of you out there use VS Code. I would assume a lot, but I don't like to assume. So would love to hear what editors you use as well. But VS Code's one that I use quite frequently, as well as some JetBrains products. And we don't yet have a specific to Waypoint highlighting right now. I think Terraform is the most popular, and so that's the one that I use. This is all HCL at the end of the day. And that's one thing I like about working with Hashicorp tools, are that you can just use HCL for just about anything, whether that be Packer, Terraform, Nomad, Vault, all of these different configs. I like that you have that one configuration language that once you learn that, you can kind of work with all these other products as well. Okay, cool. So as you saw before, we have our application. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a node application. And so we're gonna once this cluster gets installed, and once we're able to interact with Waypoint, we'll get a feedback loop up and running, and we can actually do some deployments and change some things on the fly as well. Okay, so let's talk through this Waypoint file and get a sense of what Waypoint does. So if you haven't used Waypoint before, Waypoint is it's a really fantastic tool. When I've worked with several different companies, every new company that I go to, I always hear the phrase, "We do things a little bit differently here." And that's been the case for just about everywhere that I've worked, and might be the case for you as well. And Waypoint's goal is to try to get rid of that phrase and try to standardize how you actually go about doing your deployments. Initially, the vision for Waypoint was to build, work with your containerized applications and to deploy them to any platform of choice. And as of Waypoint 0.6, we've really started to focus on Kubernetes and eliminating the rough edges or the dark corners when it comes to working with Kubernetes as a platform. Waypoint helps build your platform as a service, makes it easier to onboard applications as well. You could use something like Flux or Flagger, or there are a bunch of, or Argo. There are a bunch of CI/CD options out there as well. But the thing with Waypoint is that it's a lot more than a CI/CD platform as well. What I like about Waypoint is that it fully encapsulates the entirety of the software lifecycle. You can build with it, deploy with it, and then release with it. So Waypoint uses cloud native build packs to actually go about building your application. The cool thing is that you don't even need a Docker file to do so. And you'll notice that I don't have one in this repository. So we're going to get to see that in action today. Really quick, walking through here, you can see I've set my project name, and this app block is really the big deal here. That's where we're going to define all of these things. And Waypoint has a ton of features, and I will not be able to get through most of them today, but always happy to answer questions if you have them on that front. There's just so much that's being added, and all of it's really, really fantastic, in my opinion. We're setting some labels here. We're not going to really use these, but these are going to be nice in terms of being able to see and visualize these things within the Waypoint UI as well as within Kubernetes. And then first off here, we have our build stanza. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be using cloud native build packs to get this up and running. So we're going to be using pack. We could use Docker. There are different plugins when it comes to Waypoint. And I definitely recommend checking out the Waypoint site for that and seeing what's available to you. Some of the cooler ones as well are, if you wanted to deploy an AWS Lambda application, you have the ability to do that, as well as work within the logs and see what's going on and getting that level of observability as well. I'm going to be storing this image in my Docker Hub repository here, just using my name. And I'm actually tagging it with getref pretty, which is a function that we have available to us within Waypoint. And instead of using 1, 2, latest, I do not recommend using latest. We have this ability to actually use the get SHA in a pretty way. And so we can actually use that, and then that helps us burst cache. We don't run into any issues as we're building and pushing these images up or overriding one another. So that's pretty helpful. Cool. So when we go about deploying this application, locally this port is set to 5,000 when I'm interacting with it. But as we deploy it, it's actually 3,000. So I have to define that here. So we're deploying, we're using Kubernetes, and we're defining this service port here. Within Waypoint 0.6, I have this ability to auto-scale my deployments as well, which is one of the fun demos that we're going to go and show you today. And so I'll go about that in just a little bit here. We can set what we expect to request as far as this workload goes, and then what the limit is around CPU. We can also set memory and some other things as well, but today CPU is the big one that we care about. This autoscale is autoscaling built into Waypoint 0.6. So as we see Waypoint mature, and when you start to take a look at projects like the native project with a K native, you can really start to, once you have people on Kubernetes, you can really start to abstract away some really good workflows. And we're starting to do that with Waypoint. So as your application receives more users and traffic, because that's everybody's most wild dream, right? We want to have a lot of blog readers, or we want to have a lot of people using the service. If we define success that way, that's what we want. So using this auto scale block, we can actually say, okay, I want 2 pods running. I want to be able to burst up to 5. And as the CPU hits 75% utilization, let's add a pod. So that's something that's really cool that came out in Waypoint 0.6 that we're going to take a look at here in just a little bit. And then lastly, deploy and release sound pretty similar, right? And in most cases, they're used interchangeably. But when it comes to Waypoint, deploying is the act of pushing your application onto the platform that you have specified. Releasing is actually connecting the outside world or your network with your application, with that version of your application. So here, it's actually going to take our load balancer and point it at the brand new deployment that we've pushed up, rather than, V1, basically V1, V2. You have these interesting canary type deployments that you can specify, so on and so forth. So that's what we're doing here. And that sums up our Waypoint file that we've walked through. I've also got some other good news. Our Kubernetes cluster is ready. So we can actually start to work with this now. Okay, so let me go ahead and extend this. Let me go ahead and clear that. And what's the best way to start interacting with our Kubernetes cluster via the command line? So we've spun this up in EKS, so we can actually just use Amazon's AWS CLI to get that. Oh, well, maybe not. Maybe if I install it. Oh no, do this. Apologies, my homebrew installation got borked, and so I had to remove it. And so there are clearly some things I'm missing on this machine, but not some others. So we'll go ahead and make sure that we have the right dependencies here. And then as soon as we have that, oh, no hyphen. Cool. Today I learned. As soon as we have that, then we'll be able to interact with our cluster and kind of get what we need from an authentication perspective out of our EKS cluster. So, okay, just about done. And drum roll, please. I did get a brand new internet service, which is a lot faster than the previous one. The previous one was DSL, so kind of like a dial-up service, and the new one's a little bit faster, but unfortunately, installing still takes the same amount of time. Once we get a M1 chip or something like that, then it'll be a little bit faster, maybe. Okay, fantastic. So we have that. Let's go ahead and install this Kubernetes config and update this. So within Terraform, we could have pulled in that information via just kind of writing the file and writing it locally to disk. But this is a demo. I could have done that, but typically it's best to leave Terraform state and all those things as secure as possible and not generate files that might change. And it's just not the best practice to follow. It doesn't typically make sense with a lot of people's workflows. So that's why I did it that way. Okay, so we have our config. Let's take a look at our nodes that we have here. We should have 3 as specified in the Terraform files. Let's take a look. There it is. We can see that these are only 6 minutes old. So welcome to the world, Kubernetes cluster. Happy to have you. Let's take a look at our pods. You'll notice that I typically just muscle memory. I will type in Kubernetes shorthand, kube control right here, or kubectl or kubectl. I've aliased to just simply the letter K. And Kubernetes has this really cool feature called shorthand, Kubernetes shorthand, that you can use. And so also kind of doing the same thing here. If you want to do nodes, you can actually do NO. If you want to do pods, you can do PO and see what's running. So as we can see, we have our metric server, our Nginx ingress controller setup. We have a Waypoint runner, which you get for free. You don't have to pay for it at all with every Waypoint server that you install. Waypoint server handles all of the API concerns when it comes to Waypoint. The Waypoint runner handles GitOps workflows, configuration that you want to set up, and a whole host of other things. I won't get too deep into the Waypoint runner today, but just know that it's a really great tool for extending your workflows and your workloads. And again, always happy to chat about that offline, or feel free to at me about that. Okay, so we have everything up and running. You'll notice that I have Waypoint in the CLI here, but we're going to get an error in a second, and that's going to say it can't read from the server. That's because I haven't authenticated with it. So this is really cool, right? We used infrastructure as code to stand up Waypoint and get our Kubernetes cluster all ready to go, but we didn't authenticate to it. How the heck are we going to do that? Well, the answer is, again, quite straightforward. So I can do Waypoint login, and you do have to use Waypoint 0.6 for this feature. So this is something new that we added, was not only the Helm chart, But this ability, so as I'm connected to my Kubernetes cluster, I can just Waypoint login from Kubernetes. It'll download all of the context in the authentication for my Waypoint server. And with Waypoint login, I'm done. That's all I needed to do. And that pulls in all of the right information that I need to be able to do this. Waypoint, let me pull this open here so you can actually see what I'm doing. Okay. So Waypoint uses a token-based system. You can authenticate into an OpenID Connect method as well. And I would recommend that for production workloads. You'll notice here that I don't have fully qualified domain names. And that's the reason I'm not going to go through Nginx Ingress today. It's just because I'm using AWS links. I'm not using any proper domain names right now. So we'll see that we're using HTTPS, and it's okay that this is not secure. It's not, but it's okay for this demo that it's not secure, just because, again, we're using that unqualified domain name. We're basically going right to this load balancer that's connected to the Waypoint server. So we can see that there's no projects in here, but we were able to authenticate into the server. Let me bump this up just a little bit too, so you can see it. All right. So that was a lot. We got our infrastructure stood up. We have our Waypoint server stood up. We authenticated with both our cluster and our Waypoint server. So now it's time to get started with applications, right? Typically, you're able to defer, or kind of you might already have a cluster that's up and running. But getting these prerequisites out of the way are going to make things a lot more streamlined for us as we go about working with this application. So we've seen the application. How do we get started with that? We also got to kind of walk through the Waypoint configuration. Again, how do we get started? Best way to get started is simply Waypoint init. So that's going to go ahead and lint and take a look at our project file, waypoint.hcl file, and make sure everything is correct. And it is. So we got this project instantiated. If I click into it, there are a couple different contexts here that are worth calling out. So let me go back to Waypoint here in the root. So you have a project, and inside of that, you have your application. So at the project level, you can hit Manage Settings, and this is where the GitOps capabilities exist. I won't be going through this today, but you can actually plug in a Git a repository here, backed in Git. It doesn't have to be in GitHub either. Just so long as it follows the Git protocol, that's great. You can give it a branch or a different identifier here, a source path if you don't have that Waypoint HCL file right at the root. And then you can actually offer it these different types of authentication and then turn on an automated sync. So as you push changes, your code will get deployed in a GitOps fashion. And that's where the runner comes in. The runner does need authentication too. Say if you're pushing to Docker Hub, those credentials. If you're deploying to AWS and Lambda, those credentials. So that's how you work with that. There's some other things that you can set to that are quite nice. Input variables. So you can actually templatize your files, and say if you wanted to create a different image name for your different projects or applications, you can define that here rather than actually putting it into your Waypoint configuration like I've done today. And then lastly, we have config variables, which are dynamic configuration variables. These can actually track config maps or secrets or things that you store in Vault as things that will restart the process on your pod. And it won't even restart the pod itself, just that process. So if you want to pull in dynamic configuration or have things that you change or feature flags, things like that, that's where these live. Again, won't be able to go through those today, but definitely worth checking out if you have some time. Okay, so we've initiated our Waypoint project. Again, that's cool, but there's not really much we can do with that. So let's go ahead over here and run one of my favorite commands ever. If you've used Hashicorp's Vagrant, that's where I started my journey into DevOps. We have a similar command here. Instead of Vagrant up, we have Waypoint up. So with that, we can actually kick this off. Oh, I need to start Docker. That's a good thing to do. Okay, so we'll get that up and running here shortly. So we'll be using Cloud Native build packs to build this out. I'm running all of these commands off of my machine, and so that's why I have to have Docker stood up. if I had authenticated with Docker Hub within Kubernetes and with that Waypoint runner, I could actually just use that within Kubernetes. One of the other features that comes out in Waypoint 0.6 is this ability to have a non-privileged build with using Kaneko. So we don't actually have to give root access or anything too wild in terms of actually building those things out if you're using the runners to build this out. Okay, so it looks like we have Docker up and running, so that's great. Let's go ahead and do Waypoint up. So again, what's really cool here is that we get this feedback out here in our CLI, but we also get it here within the Waypoint UI, and this is all in real time. If I click into builds and I click into pack, we can actually see that these are exactly the same, which they should be. You know, it's nice to know that there's no tricks, nothing up my sleeve. We're able to stream all of this data and get all of this information as we're building and pushing and deploying our application. So again, we didn't have a Docker file here, and you're able to see that Cloud Native Build Packs was able to figure out what we're working with, and that's a node project based on the dependencies within the repository. So really, that's the secret behind how all of this works, is that we had a package JSON here. If you're using a Ruby project and you had a gem file, it's going to be able to take a look at that and understand that it's a Ruby project. Same thing for a Go project or .NET or several others that exist right now. There's a couple that I have to look at. I like working with the Elixir language a bit, so that's one thing I definitely have to take a look at and see if that's supported right now too. I'd be very curious to hear what applications you're using. You know, are you using COBOL? What are you using with Cloud Native Build Packs? That's definitely something worth taking a look at. All right, so as this builds, this is the most fun point in time in the project, kind of waiting for everything to get built. I'm actually going to bounce back here. So looks like we're cool. So this is actually pushing this up right now. And we do start to get some, or it's still building it. We do get some nice feedback from the UI as well. So even here, we're able to see, Taylor, you need to start Docker. Great. This is fantastic to get this feedback and then to get that logged too. You know, if not slightly embarrassing for when working with the team later. But nice to have all of this audited and logged. And then this gives all kinds of teams this ability to understand what one another is doing and follow the workflow that works best for them. You can encapsulate this all in that GitOps workflow and then have things triggered off of changes to the repository and then log it, look at it, and kind of understand it as a team within the UI. Or, everything that you see here in the UI also has a CLI equivalent as well. So however you decide you want to work, you have that option. All right. So this will take just a little bit longer. Again, the most drama-inducing part of the deployment is the build. Will it build? Will it work? Chances are good is what my fortune cookie said this morning. So we should be good on that front. Some of the other things that we get to take a look at are deployments, the releases, and then we can actually exec right into the container as well. I'll show you that in a second, so that or once this is deployed, and then we can take a little bit more of a look there. I'm actually going to go ahead and share some other things as well. Okay. So in the chat, I'm actually going to put in the Waypoint 0.6 blog post, which has a good amount of examples and things that you can follow along with if you want to check those out and kind of get a sense of all of the things that are new within Waypoint 0.6. Another link to that Terraform repository if you want to get this EKS cluster up and running. And it does cost money. Just about every single cloud is looking for a way to try to get you on the platform and then entice you to pay for that platform as well. So please be mindful of that. If you want to take a look and get started with this, there is that consideration to make as well. The Waypoint examples, Hashicorp has a bunch of Waypoint examples available to you in all of these different contexts, and we keep adding more as new releases come out. And then lastly, there's learn.hashicorp.com/Waypoint, which has a lot of tutorials about different aspects and contexts of Waypoint. If you want to really focus in on that one thing, quite a lot of tutorials. So we've gone through quite a bit today. And I should have this up. I apologize, it's taken taken some time, but typically runs pretty fast. But again, maybe it just needs a little bit of coffee. And also, it is just harder to get started on Monday mornings sometimes, at least the times than it is for me. Hopefully, it's a little bit later in the day or the week when you watch this, if you're watching this on YouTube. So as this gets built, this will push this up to Docker Hub, and then onto our Kubernetes cluster where we can start working with that. I am going to make sure that I have my load testing tool here. Okay, good. I do have that installed. Bump this up. All right. Cool. Okay, so I think we're nearing the finish line here. Once this gets pushed up and deployed, then I'm going to show you that we should have 2 pods running. And if that's the case, then we've done good and we're good to go on that front. And then I'll go about showing you how we can actually simulate a lot of load on this application and the auto-scaling features and functionality. Again, and showing how to tweak that too if we want to go about changing that as well. Some of the nice things that you have when it comes to Kubernetes and when you install that metrics server is this. I'm actually going to spin this up and do this. Refresh my cloud credentials and we're good there. Let me bump up the text a little bit. Okay. So what you can do once you have metric server on your Kubernetes cluster, oh my goodness. Don't know what you have until it's gone. It's a very true statement. Let me go ahead and install watch here. This command will just allow me to execute this every 1 second. So I'll wait for that to get installed. And then we'll take a look at the pods and their current resources that are getting used. One thing that I do remark on quite a bit is that while installing some of these things, it would be great to hear Jeopardy music or some kind of theme song. But I've opened up a couple issues on that front, but no project maintainers want to implement that feature just yet, sadly. All right. So let's take a look at our pods right now and just kind of get this up and running so we can get a sense of what's going on. So metric server gives us this capability, which is really nice. So we can see that across all of the things that we have running here right now, we're not using that much capacity within our cluster. We can see that the cores that we're using is pretty small. Once we get to 1,000 of these units, I believe this is millicores. 1,000 would be 1 core, essentially, is how Kubernetes divides this up. And then memory, this is in bytes here too. So very small CPU and memory footprint right now before we're actually going and kind of pushing up our applications and putting a lot of load into them. Okay, so as we, so there we go. We've built the image. Now it's tagging it. It's going to push it up to Docker Hub. One thing I forgot to mention was that Waypoint has an entry point binary that it installs into your image as well. This is what authenticates it and gets it, it syncs the information between this and the Waypoint server so we could actually make those dynamic configuration changes or load in those values or execute a shell within Waypoint. So that's also something that's really great to have, something that's, again, a very small footprint and really doesn't make your image size grow all that much. And gives us all of these extra capabilities and even being able to see the logs and get a status of where that deployment is at. So we push this up, it's deploying onto Kubernetes, it's waiting for it to be live. This is just a message about the metric server, but not to worry, everything should be working here for us. And there we go, there we have it. We actually have pushed something up with Waypoint. Waypoint, again, Waypoint gives you a lot. One of the other things that it gives you is, so this link is the live link to get to our application. But we also have a deployment URL as well. And so this is something that's nice for, this is our Horizon URL redirect service. It's kind of like ngrok, but it gives you, Hashicorp owns this. You could install it locally. There are instructions to do so, not locally, but within the system of your choice. But this is something that we run. on our side to make it easier for you. You don't have to use it. You can turn it off, but it's something that's nice to be able to share out if you just want to get that quick feedback loop with someone else, your team, and kind of understand, okay, is this what you wanted to see? All right. And this should come up. This might take a second to get loaded up just because it's spinning up a load balancer and kind of getting that traffic going to it. So not to fret. This is something that you might see from time to time. And then this should just come up here in a little bit. If not, I'll take a look and double check my configuration. So we can see that we've gotten this deployed. Say we want to make a change. Let's actually go through and push up a change really quick. So if I go in here, let's go into our views. Let's go into our pages. And so this Node.js app was deployed with Waypoint. That was good. But let's say that I wanted my team to know that I deployed this today. Here we go. Just add in that line here. And then I could actually go in, do Waypoint up again. And then that will actually go about deploying that out for me, which is quite nice. This should go a little bit faster. If it doesn't, that's fine. I'll bypass and see if there's any questions that you want me to answer on that front. But really makes this easy. And again, you can follow that GitOps workflow, or you can just run Waypoint up, and it will go ahead and take care of that for you too. One question that I do get asked from time to time is, do we have to do Waypoint up? No. If you want to check your tests or your code, or if you want to gate things appropriately, say after a build, maybe there's something you want to check or something you want to run against that image, you could actually pull this into an existing CI/CD pipeline and just do Waypoint build or Waypoint deploy or Waypoint release. So those are some nice options that you have available to you. All right, so we have liftoff when it comes to our public link here, and that's what I'm going to use for this next piece in the demo and simulate load. So okay, cool. This second build went much more quickly, which is great to see. And then as soon as this deployment is done, it's going to go ahead and push this up, and boom. So we can see we have this V2 now, which should have the changes that we made, which is great. And then this is the link I just loaded up. If I click this, we can see that that's already been deployed as well. So we've even got a successful deployment under our belt, and now subsequent deployments are going to be a lot easier to do. If we wanted to change this background to red or blue or whatever that might be, or write a to-do application or what have you. So cool. So we have this all good and ready to go. We'll go back to this and we can take a look to see. Okay, cool. So we do have those 2 pods that we specified. That's fantastic. Now let's go ahead and simulate some load. Now I never remember my flags here for Hey, and huge shout out to Yana, who created this tool. Really fantastic in terms of simulating a lot of load, or having there's words with friends on mobile devices, but load testing with friends is a lot more fun, I have to say. All right. Okay, so let's put a lot of pressure on this application. So I'm going to do so number of requests to run typically is 200. Let's bump that up to 1500, and then concurrent workers. Let's do 300 and see if it can handle that. So, and if our application will scale, which it absolutely should. That's a lot of load to put on a machine. All right. Let me see here. I need to take this out. Then eliminate the trailing slash. What am I doing wrong here? Okay. Let me see here. Maybe I can take this URL instead, because it's going to be going to the same place. Actually, let me do this. Get rid of these concurrent, actually, and see if that might be my issue. Even the number. Interesting. So it looks like I have some DNS issues, so my apologies on that front. It doesn't look like I'll be able to run that today. Let me try one more thing. Okay, so this might work. All right. And let me add in one more thing too. I'm going to add in Z, and let's make this run for like 3 minutes. That should be good. So, okay. So we've initiated a lot of traffic to go to our application, and we should see that starting to scale up here in just a second. All right, so we can see V2 is the application that we pushed up. We do still have V1 running because Waypoint keeps around. And you can specify this, how many deployments you actually still want to have running. So we can actually still, fail back to that if we wanted to, and nice to have that kept around. So looks like our application is really standing up to the load quite nicely. I'm going to check and see if there's something that I didn't type in terms of the concurrency, because I would like to show you this. Okay, so that looks like it's working. And now we should see our CPU cores jump up here shortly as all the traffic starts to come in for that. And then once it does, we could see as soon as we took that off, it went back down to 1. The metric server won't have a real time. It's going to evaluate every couple of seconds, so it won't be 100% real time on that front. But really, really a nice tool to have in terms of watching what's going on with your applications and kind of helping them to scale up, or if you want to set alerts or things like that with something like Prometheus, it's also quite nice too. Yeah, my apologies, isn't working the way that I want it to. Let me try one more thing and see if our DNS has gotten this resolved. Okay, good. We do have DNS resolution there. And we'll see if that works. In the meantime, if you have any questions, would definitely be happy to answer those on that front. We see our load coming in there, which is really nice, 212. I believe I've set the limit here to 200 and 300 before it starts to restart the pod. So this will stay at this level for a bit. So there we see 309. The application, the metric server pretty soon is going to be like, oh no, we have to we have to scale up. And then you'll see another V2 pod get added. So we'll wait a couple more seconds. I believe it's just about every 30 seconds that it evaluates this, and then we'll scale up from there. But again, a really great feature to have within the Waypoint framework, and especially when you can when you can get your DNS and CLI configuration all set. All right, so as you can see, we actually scaled up 2. Wow, we put a lot of load onto the application. So now we're at 4 total running pods. And if we were to remove this, the scale in capabilities do take longer. So unfortunately, I think it takes about 10 minutes to scale in, just as a protective measure in terms of, it's easier to scale up than it is to scale back down, just in case you have another load that gets triggered on that front. So that is by design, and that is pretty helpful. We can see that we've taken the load off, and we can see that really starting to pare back, which is quite nice too. So again, Waypoint giving you that level up within your application without having to do much. This takes typically hundreds of lines of YAML or just a lot of knowledge about how Kubernetes is put together. But with Waypoint, it's a lot easier than that. You just specify, what's your min, what's your max, and what's the CPU that you want to set that at. So as long as you have a metric server installed in your cluster, you're good to go, which is quite nice. And with that, that concludes all of my demos and kind of the walkthrough of Waypoint and Terraform and Kubernetes today. But thank you all so much for joining. If you have any other questions or anything on that front, we'd be more than happy to answer the questions as you have them. If you're watching the recording of this, you can find me around the web as @onlydole, ONLYDOLE. And again, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have on that front. But thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for the great demo. That's a wonderful preparation of these demos. It's actually show what the Waypoint does is. So one thing I think most of the people who are watching the session comes in their mind, how the Waypoint is different from the scaffold tool that we have, or other tools related to the Kubernetes.
Great question. Great question. So really, it's all about kind of what really boils down to the context. And so, with Skaffold and with Knative and kind of all these other tools, some are frameworks or some kind of attack a specific context. Waypoint's really looking to help you out with the entirety of, building out your application, hosting it, and then kind of getting some context back. One thing I did forget to show, I'll actually share my screen again. So even on that front too, one thing I didn't cover was this concept of statuses within Waypoint. So we can actually see, this is available. If I click into my deployments, I can actually see the objects within Kubernetes that were deployed and how are they doing? Is it okay? Is it up? We can see this as minimum availability, and then as things scale, kind of get a sense as to what's going on. And then as we click into these things too, we can even see the JSON that is representative of this object as well. So Waypoint is looking to really occupy all parts of the stack when it comes to things like that. So if you can use it for a wide variety of things rather than just something specific on that front is really the quick answer.
Yes, absolutely. I think the UI is one of the particular answer to this question. The UI is not in there, the scaffold tool, but it is in there, is in the Waypoint. You can track down what the pod is doing. You do the auto scaling as well. That's remarkable. If you have the metrics server set up and the load is actually generated you as you showing the demos on, you created the load and apps on then rebuild the more pods to need to scale up horizontally. And then the loads come down, it scales down. That's a wonderful feature, I think. Number one. So I think there are so many great things in it. You not only deploy to the Kubernetes, but you can deploy to the ECS and other services that's available. That's not possible outside the Waypoint. That's number two feature. And also tell us about how, let's say, if somebody set up the canary deployment or the blue-green deployment, how they set it up, or some prediction how to set up these kind of setup with Waypoints.
Yeah, so when it comes to, honestly, I've got to do some more work on that front myself, because typically I've done like the more simple canary setup where it's just passing that health check or that initial thing and then kind of diverting over. What's nice with Waypoint is it's similar to most other tools in that, if you push up a bad deployment or something like that, it won't actually shift the traffic over to, well, I hope that your users enjoy 500 errors. It's so it won't do that to you, which is really nice. But yeah, I am kind of curious to see if there are other more complicated checks or, taking a look at, making a status page that returns JSON and not triggering things until a flag is flipped or a certain status is successful, or like RabbitMQ is enabled or, so those are some things I definitely want to take a look at in the future and, see how complex we can make some of these checks or what other real world things that people want to see. I'm definitely curious to hear on too.
Yes, absolutely. What I see, the Waypoint file had all the configuration in it, like Docker Compose has all the services in it, and you just run the command Docker Compose up, and it is orchestrated the containers, the services. So Waypoint up is actually the same file. We can set these analogy as the same, but it's in that same file there is so much of the stuff going on. And I think the one natural question came into the people mind when we have so much stuff in that file, how to set up some security best practices around this building up or laying out the structure of that file.
Yeah. So it's really great. So and one thing I forgot. So you can also get the logs, or you can shell right into the pod itself. Yes. So I can actually get So if we do env, we can actually see everything that's going on here too. Apologies, I forgot to show you that. But yeah, in terms of seeing logs and everything else, you get that quick kind of feedback loop. And then in terms of security and kind of how to abstract this. you can actually start to break out your waypoint file in terms of, so say like this probably isn't the most secure, right? So, and it's not useful to my team or me, if they're pushing up to my Docker Hub repository. We could break this out and do like a var image here, and then create a variable definition up, further on the file, and then actually instantiate that out per project. There are integrations with Kubernetes secrets, config maps, or even Hashicorp Vault. If you set up a cluster on that front, and you can authenticate to that or have a dynamic config, and then you can actually break those components out. Like even granular things like the service port. There's a lot of things you can specify per stanza in here, per block. And so that's also something that's quite useful. I haven't seen too many people use that just yet. I'm really curious to see how people use that in the future, and just like functions overall, and different abstractions. But I'd say that's probably the biggest one, or like around secrets and images, and kind of where to specify those, and then deciding whether or not to put those in Vault or some other places.
Yes, absolutely. So in a structure, we have at least one waypoint up file. And when you say waypoint up, is to get that file, that's default file, and then it's build the orchestration. And we have to check how the services lay out during the future. When we have a Docker compose up, the first question people might, how to separate out different sources. And they say you can build out separate Docker files for the images. And I think the waypoint is actually the same in that regard as well. So before I let you go, shed some light on, you already shared some tutorials and this kind of stuff on how to learn and these kind of stuff. Where to find people? And that's my question. Where to find people who are working on Waypoint, so we can talk about one of them you are, and also send some light where to find this community and learn from these awesome people from the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I'd say the Waypoint repository is really a great place. The community has been so active in raising issues, and we have the entire engineering team talking in each of those issues as well. So definitely recommend raising things up. If it's more of like a broad question, maybe not so technical, or a feature or implementation, or it is an implementation, discuss DISCUSS. .hashicorp.com is also a great place to check out too, and then you can kind of raise things up. That's our forum. There are other users and experts within there that'll really be happy to have that dialogue with you. And then I'm not awake 24/7, but definitely always happy to have that that chat with you as well, or connect you with people that might be helpful too. So happy to be an ambassador in that respect. But yeah, it's a great community. It's a lot of fun, and it's really great to have that engagement with the engineering team, and the rest of the community. It's nice not to have a project that's like, no, like we only talk over here. Please put it in the suggestion box. It's like, no, let's have an open conversation, which is quite nice.
Yes, absolutely. So everybody who are listening to us, watch, at least if you want more conversation around, follow to Taylor Dolezal on Twitter, and talk us about what you are at the next meetup, what you want to say. I think you first, so thanks very much for showing the wonderful power of Waypoint. I think all the lacking point that we previously have while setting up like a scaffold tool or other tools in the Kubernetes, Waypoint is a much richer. It has UI, it has auto-scaling option built in. It has so many other like Helm install, and there are so many features coming up with 0.6 release, and so much stuff, I think, ton going out a lot in the moving forward. So I think the wonderful tool to explore at this moment of time. And I think those who watch these demos that you showed up, they're really surprised by the power of Waypoint. So I will explore after the session as well. I will demo all out these things that you showed up today in my laptop, and will set up how it's all effectively run. Thank you very much, Taylor. It's been wonderful talking to you. Everybody in time joined. I learned some ton of new stuff. Today I learned a Waypoint 0.6. This is my day one of learning Waypoint 6 as of November 8. So I remember this date when I joined you and learned Waypoint 0.6. So thank you very much, Taylor. Talk to you again in the future. But thank you very much for spending time with me today. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And it puts a smile on my face every time I'm talking to you.
Right back at you. No, it's I really like finding people with that same level of enthusiasm and just like people. How can you be bored by people with so much excitement around how to do things? Or like, let's find out how to make it better. So thank you so much for inviting me today. It's always a pleasure. I really enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone. And we will talk to you again the next webinar. Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this channel. Bye bye. Hope to see you again.
Bye bye. Thanks, everybody.